Welcome to True Voice Shorts, a curated audio series where we empower your story with voice. Each episode features a story of insight, wonder, or truth, delivered in 30 minutes or less. Today's story is from the True Voice Reflections series, where personal essays meet professional storytelling. Whether memoir, meditation, or message, every voice matters. Today, we'll begin with a question that many of us carry. What does it really mean to live a good life? In this reflection on happiness and liberty, we explore how freedom, character, and compassion shape the lives we build. About the author, John Stuart, 1806 to 1873, was one of the most influential thinkers of the 19th century. Raised in London by his father, the philosopher James Mill, he received an intense early education, brilliant, demanding, and narrow. He later wrote about a period of emotional collapse in his young adulthood, when he realized that intelligence alone could not guarantee a meaningful life. That crisis reshaped him. He began to care about feelings, imagination, friendships, and the inner life alongside reason and reform. He became a defender of individual freedom, free speech, equality for women, and democratic government. He also argued for a moral principle that many people still find compelling today, that our choices should increase well-being, not only for ourselves, but for others too. In other words, he tried to connect private life and public life, what makes a person flourish, and what makes a society worth living in. This reflection combines two strands of his thought. The first asks, what is happiness, really, beyond simple comfort? The second asks, what conditions help people pursue that happiness without being crushed by power, fear, or conformity? What happiness really means. When people hear the word happiness, many picture a quick emotion, a good day, a pleasant surprise, a burst of laughter. That kind of happiness is real. It matters, but it's also fragile. It rises and falls with the weather of our lives. I want to talk about a happiness that holds steady through ordinary difficulty, not constant excitement, not endless entertainment. A happiness that can survive a hard week, a hard year, even a hard season of life. To get there, we need to begin with a simple correction. Happiness is not the same as pleasure in the narrow sense. It's not about feeling good. It's about living in a way that gives us reason to feel grateful we are alive. It is the experience of meaning, belonging, and growth. It is a life where pain is not absent, but where pain does not swallow the whole story. I'd argue that human beings naturally recognize different kinds of satisfaction. Some pleasures are immediate and shallow, comfort, distraction, a quick reward. Other pleasures are slower, deeper, learning something difficult, creating something beautiful, repairing a relationship, keeping a promise, growing in courage, choosing integrity when it costs. This does not mean the simple pleasures are bad. It means they're not enough on their own. If you want a modern example, think about the difference between consuming content and building a life. Content can be delightful. It can also become a way to disappear. You can fill a night with scrolling and still feel oddly empty, but you can also spend an evening reading, practicing a craft, talking honestly with someone you love, or working on a project that matters, and you might feel more alive, even if it's not easy. My point is that human beings have higher capacities: curiosity, imagination, moral feeling, and once we develop them, we cannot be fully satisfied without using them. He put it bluntly. It is better, he said, to be a dissatisfied human being than a satisfied pig. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. The line is sharp on purpose. He wanted to show that there are forms of life that may be comfortable but small, and forms of life that may be challenging but dignified. A life can be comfortable and still feel wasted. A life can be difficult and still feel worth living. Now, if happiness is not constant pleasure, what is it made of? He described two ingredients that often appear in the happiest lives: tranquility and engagement. Tranquility is not numbness. It is steadiness. It is the ability to enjoy what is present without constantly craving for more. It is the capacity to rest without guilt, to hold your life without panic. Engagement is the opposite of drifting. It is involvement with something that matters: work, art, relationships, service, learning, community. It is being aware to the world rather than merely passing through it. Tranquility without engagement can become boredom. Engagement without tranquility can become burnout. But together they create a life that can handle stress without collapsing. Think about the people you know who seem quietly well. Not constantly cheerful, not pretending life is perfect, but grounded. Often they have both ingredients. They have something that pulls them forward, and they have enough inner calm to breathe. He also warned about a common trap. We lose the higher pleasures, not because we choose something worse, but because we neglect what is better. In the modern world, neglect has become easy, not because we are lazy, but because we are overwhelmed. Notifications, deadlines, responsibility, noise. And when we are exhausted, we reach for what is quickest, the easy distraction, the small comfort. Over time, the inner life shrinks, not dramatically, but quietly. We stop reading. We stop making things. We stop having conversations that go deeper than logistics. We stop asking the questions that used to make us feel human. He would say, that is not a moral failure. It is a predictable outcome of neglected capacities. The good news is that capacities can be reawakened. You can return to them the way you return to a garden. A garden does not shame you for neglect. It simply shows you the truth. Weeds grow where care is absent, but growth also returns when attention returns. Happiness is like a garden. It is cultivated. It grows when we practice attention, when we build habits that nourish us, and when we keep choosing the deeper satisfactions, even if the deeper satisfactions ask more of us. Why caring about others changes happiness. He also made the claim that sounds counterintuitive to modern ears. He argued that people who only care about themselves usually end up with less happiness, not more. At first glance, this sounds like a sermon, but his reasoning is practical. A life organized around me has a narrow range of joys. Your wins are only your wins. Your comforts are only your comforts. Your disappointments are heavy because there is nothing larger to hold them. But when your concern expands, when you care about other people, your life gains more points of connection. You start to experience joy when others thrive. You notice beauty more often because you're not trapped inside your own anxiety. Compassion is not only a moral virtue, it is a way to widen the world. Now, this doesn't mean you must sacrifice yourself endlessly. It means that being human is relational, and happiness grows in relational soil. Consider how many of our happiest moments are shared. Helping a friend through a hard time, celebrating somebody's milestones, being part of a team that does good work, making someone laugh when they needed it, showing up. Even when those moments cost something, time, attention, energy, they often return something deeper than comfort. They return meaning. I believe that a thoughtful person can find endless sources of satisfaction in nature, in art, in history, in conversation, in learning, in the effort to make the world a little less cruel. Happiness does not require fame. It does not require luxury. It requires engagement and care. Now, this is where many people push back. What about suffering? What about poverty? What about illness, grief, injustice, and fear? He did not deny suffering. He lived in an era of immense social hardship. He knew the world was not gentle. But he also insisted that human effort can reduce suffering over time. Education, medicine, social reform, better laws. These things matter. Progress can be slow, but it is real. And here's an important nuance. I argue that self-sacrifice is not a virtue by itself. Suffering is not holy simply because it is suffering. Sacrifice matters only when it produces something good, when it protects others, heals harm, or increases well-being. This is a modern relief. You are not required to suffer for suffering's sake. You are not required to burn yourself down to prove you are good. The question is, does what you give up actually serve something worthy? Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes it is no. Wisdom is learning to tell the difference. Liberty, the quiet enemy of conformity. Now we turn to liberty. When modern people worry about freedom, we often imagine government control. We picture censorship, surveillance, laws that restrict bodies and voices. He worried about those things too, but he also worried about something quieter, social pressure. Even in a free country, he said, the majority can become a kind of tyrant, not always through law, but through opinion, through the constant pressure to agree, to fit in, to be acceptable. Today, that pressure can come from anywhere: workplace culture, family expectations, social media, friends, groups, politics, religion, trends, and algorithms that reward outrage. You may not be arrested for thinking differently, but you may be punished with shame, with exclusion, with ridicule, with the silent closing of doors. The result is many people learn to edit themselves. They learn to keep certain questions private. They learn to hide uncertainty. They learn to imitate the right language to avoid conflict. When that happens, society becomes outwardly calm but inwardly brittle. It is calm because no one speaks honestly. It is brittle because it cannot handle the disagreement without breaking. I believe that a society that punishes difference becomes stagnant. Without space for individuality, creativity dries up, progress slows, people become cautious, fear becomes normal. He argued that individuality is not merely a private pleasure, it is a public good. So why? Because individuality is how possibilities enter the world? The beliefs we share now, the beliefs we now take for granted, once looked like threats. Religious tolerance, women's education, abolition, workers' rights, child labor laws, voting reforms, each began with people who were willing to stand outside the comfort of the majority. If the social atmosphere had smothered their dissent, progress would have been delayed, perhaps for generations. Freedom of thought, why we need open discussions. My best argument for liberty focuses on speech and thought. He said, whenever we silence an opinion, we commit a particular kind of theft. We steal from the future because that opinion might be true. or it might contain part of the truth. Or it might be wrong, but even then, the act of refuting it helps us understand why our beliefs are true. Truth is not strengthened by silence. Truth is strengthened by examination. In the modern world, this matters because we confuse two different things: the right to speak and the right to be applauded. Freedom of discussion does not guarantee approval. It guarantees a hearing. It protects the space where ideas can be tested in daylight rather than forming in secrecy. And here's the hard truth. If you have never heard an intelligent objection to your belief, you probably do not understand your belief as well as you think you do. When we stay inside ourselves, inside echo chambers, when we only hear our own side, we begin to mistake repetition for truth. We become confident without becoming wise. My point is not that every opinion is equally good. His point is that honest disagreement is one of the best tools we have for sharpening truth. Without it, even good ideas become slogans, and slogans are easy to weaponize. A living belief can explain itself. A dead belief can only repeat itself. So what does a healthy culture of discussion require? It requires the ability to hear offense without collapsing. It requires the ability to distinguish between disagreement and harm. It requires courage, patience, and humility. It also requires that we accept a certain discomfort as the price of intellectual growth. If you want to keep your mind alive, you must let it be challenged. Individuality, the freedom to become yourself. I would argue that people are not identical units. We are not meant to live one standardized life. We have different temperaments, talents, needs, and callings. A culture that demands one approved version of success will injure many of its members. Some people thrive in public leadership, others in quiet craftsmanship. Some people flourish in community, others need solitude. Some are driven by competition, others by service. Some feel more alive making art, others build systems, others raise children, others research the past. Individuality is the freedom to discover what kind of life fits your nature and your values. But that freedom is not only personal. It benefits everyone. Because when people are allowed to develop their unique capacities, society gains new art, new insights, new solutions. Progress depends on experimentation. I compare individuality to a kind of laboratory of living. Different people try different paths. Some fail, others succeed. Over time, society learns what works. If society punishes experimentation, society stops learning. Now, there is a boundary here that matters. Freedom is not licensed to harm others. Your freedom ends where harm begins. Not where someone is annoyed, not where someone dislikes you, not where your choices are unfamiliar. Harm is real danger, coercion, violence, fraud, oppression, exploitation. But when people confuse, "I dislike this," with "this harms me," liberty becomes impossible. A free society must allow a wide range of lives, especially the lives we do not personally understand. Bringing it together, happiness requires liberty. Let's return to that central question. What does happiness have to do with liberty? Everything. If happiness is fulfillment, it depends on developing our minds, our moral sense, our creativity, our relationships. Then happiness requires the freedom to grow. Growth cannot happen under constant fear. It cannot happen under forced conformity. It cannot happen when people are punished for exploring. It cannot happen when people must pretend in order to belong. A society that protects liberty protects the conditions that allow richer happiness. It protects the right to think, the right to question, the right to learn in public, the right to be wrong and grow, the right to become. And here is what the final connection offers. When we aim not only for our own well-being, but for the well-being of others, liberty becomes less selfish and more generous. It becomes a shared space where people can flourish together. This is the difference between freedom as isolation and freedom as community. Freedom as isolation says, leave me alone. Freedom as community says, make room for me, and I will make room for you. When liberty and concern for the common good work together, we move towards a society where more people can live lives of dignity and meaning. Not perfect lives, not painless lives, but lives worth living. So here is the reflection to carry with you. Choose the deeper satisfactions. Cultivate tranquility and engagement. Expand your care beyond yourself. Protect the freedom to think and speak honestly. Make room for individuality in yourself and in others. Because happiness is not something we clutch. It is something we build. Liberty is not just a political idea. It is the breathing space of the human spirit. Jon Stewart wrote before smartphones, before 24-hour news, before social platforms could turn your private feelings into public performance. Yet his warnings about social pressure land even harder now because many of us live inside a continuous stream of other people's opinions. We do not only encounter public opinion in the town square or the workplace, we carry it in our pockets. We wake up to it, we fall asleep to it. This changes the inner life. When your attention is constantly pulled outward, it becomes harder to cultivate tranquility. When you are always comparing your life to edited images of other lives, it becomes harder to feel contentment. When approval becomes measurable, likes, views, followers, engagement, it becomes tempting to let approval replace meaning. I would say this is the perfect recipe for a smaller happiness. Because a deeper satisfaction usually requires privacy, patience, and time. They require silence. They require the ability to be bored long enough to hear your own thoughts again. A mind that cannot rest becomes a mind that cannot grow. And a society that trains people to chase approval becomes a society that slowly loses courage. This is where liberty becomes personal. Liberty is not only protection from government power, it is also protection of your own mind from being colonized by expectation. It is the right to think a thought without immediately turning it into a public statement. It is the right to change your mind without being humiliated. It is the right to be unfinished. Freedom to be unfinished is essential to happiness because growth requires room to make mistakes. The difference between discomfort and harm. Freedom has a boundary. We are not free to harm others. Jon Stewart understood this. He also understood that disagreement and difference create discomfort, and discomfort is not the same as harm. In modern life, this distinction can feel blurry because our nervous systems are tired. Many people are exhausted, stressed, stretched thin. When you are already at capacity, even small conflicts can feel unbearable. But a culture that treats every discomfort as a crisis will lose the capacity for honest discussion. If every disagreement is labeled violence, then speech becomes impossible. If every mistake is treated as a permanent character, then growth becomes impossible. If every difference is treated as betrayal, relationships become impossible. My approach invites a steadier question. Does this action truly injure someone's rights, safety, or dignity? Or does it simply challenge my preferences, my assumptions, or my identity story? A mature society can hold discomfort without collapsing. A A mature person can learn without needing to be perfect. And this is directly tied to happiness. Because happiness, real fulfillment, depends on learning how to live in complexity. It depends on building resistance. It depends on developing character strong enough to handle disagreement without becoming cruel. Why small acts matter more than grand moral theories. One of the most practical parts of my moral thought is that he did not expect people to calculate the consequences of every action as if they were solving a math problem. He recognized that life moves quickly. Decisions are made in imperfect moments. People act from mixed motives. So instead of demanding constant calculation, he pointed towards a simpler habit. Aim your life in the direction of well-being. In modern terms, this means you do not need to have perfect answers to begin acting well. You begin by doing the next right thing. You begin by choosing what increases life rather than diminishes it. You begin by noticing where you cause unavoidable pain and correcting it. This shifts ethics from ideology to practice. It also removes the pressure of moral performance. A good life is not built by grand statements. It is built by daily choices. How you speak to the people closest to you, how you handle frustration, how you respond when you're wrong, how you treat someone who cannot help you, how you use power, even small power. This moral vision is not only about laws and public debates, it's about the kind of human being you become in ordinary moments. Liberty in relationships. Make room without losing yourself. Liberty can sound like distance, but the deeper point is about space. People need space to become themselves. That includes space inside relationships. If you have ever loved someone, you have seen this tension. You want closeness, you want freedom, you want to be known, you also want room to grow. A controlling relationship, whether romantic, familial, or professional, shrinks the inner life. It forces people into a role. Over time, resentment grows or the self goes quiet. A healthy relationship makes room. It allows the other person to evolve. It allows disagreement without threat. It allows each person to be more than what the other expects. This is not permissiveness, it's respect. John Stuart would say, respect is one of the conditions of happiness, because happiness is not only about what you feel, it is also about whether you are allowed to be real. The courage to be a person, not a brand. In a world shaped by visibility, many people feel pressured to turn themselves into a product, to be consistent, to be marketable, to have a clear identity that never changes. But human beings change. We learn, we grieve, we grow, we revise. My defense of individuality invites a different kind of courage, the courage to be a person rather than a brand. A person is allowed to be complex. A person is allowed to hold contradictions while they work things out. A person is allowed to say, I don't know yet. This matters because a life devoted to appearing correct can become a life that avoids truth. And a life that avoids truth cannot be fully happy because it cannot be fully alive. Here's a closing meditation. What we build together. So what are we really building if we take this seriously? We are building inner lives capable of deeper satisfaction. We are building communities capable of honest discussion. We are building relationships that make room for growth. We are building a society where individuality is not punished and compassion is not mocked. This is slow work. It's ordinary work. It's the kind of work that rarely goes viral, but it is the work that makes life livable. If happiness is the presence of meaning, then meaning is built over time. If liberty is the breathing space of the mind, then it must be protected daily in small decisions and small acts of courage. And if the common good is real, then our private choices matter more than we think. Choose the deeper satisfactions. Practice tranquility. Stay engaged. Care beyond yourself. Protect freedom of thought, especially when it's inconvenient. Make room for difference, including your own, because happiness is not something we clutch, it is something we cultivate. And liberty is not only a political idea, it is the daily permission to become. The practice of intellectual humility. My view of open discussion assumes something that is increasingly rare: intellectual humility. The willingness to admit we might be wrong, or at least incomplete. Humility does not mean having no convictions. It means recognizing that convictions should be earned and maintained through honest contact with reality. A humble mind will ask, what evidence would change my view? What would I say if the strongest version of the other side were sitting in front of me? Where might I be confusing outrage with truth? This kind of humility is not weakness. It is strength, because it refuses to build identity on certainty. And that is another connection to happiness. When identity depends on always being right, anxiety grows. You become defensive. You avoid complexity. You treat disagreement like an attack. But when identity is rooted in character, integrity, curiosity, courage, you can learn without fear. You can revise without shame. You can say, I was wrong, and remain whole. Freedom is a skill. We often talk about freedom as if it were simply granted or taken. I would suggest that freedom is also a skill. You can have legal freedom and still be inwardly unfree. Unfree to think because your mind is crowded with other people's expectations. Unfree to speak because you fear rejection. Unfree to choose because you have never practiced choosing. Becoming free requires practice. Practice noticing what you actually value. Practice resisting the pull of constant comparison. Practice telling the truth kindly, even when it's awkward. Practice listening without rushing to punish. Practice making room for other people's differences without losing your own center. A society becomes freer when people learn these skills. Law matters, yes, but culture matters too. The daily habits of conversation, the norms of disagreement, the willingness to grant another dignity, these are the soil in which liberty grows. And from that soil, happiness grows more easily. Because people can breathe, people can become, people can build lives that fit their nature and their calling. John Stuart was not naive about human nature. He knew people could be selfish, cruel, and short-sighted. He knew that fear often wins in the moment, yet he still argued for hope, an earned hope, because he believed human beings can learn. They can learn better ways of living. They can learn better ways of disagreeing. They can learn to reduce suffering and increase well-being. They can learn to honor individuality without abandoning community. Hope in this sense is not wishful thinking. It is a commitment. It is a decision to keep cultivating the garden, to keep choosing deeper satisfactions, to keep protecting the breathing space of the mind, to keep making room for one another to become. If that feels small, remember that most of what makes a good life is built in small ways. A conversation where you truly listen, a boundary that protects your integrity, a kindness that interrupts someone's loneliness, a moment of courage when you say what you mean, a habit of attention that restores your inner life. Small things, repeated, become a life. Thanks for joining me for this reflection. If it moved you, leave a comment, share it with a friend, or subscribe for more stories that speak to the soul.